Welcome to Truly Terrified, Paranormal versus Physics, where we talk about some really weird stuff and Joe the scientist explains how it's not possible, or maybe it is. I'm Lynn and
I'm Joe.
Today we're going to talk about the grave in our backyard. If you've listened to any of our previous episodes, you know that we oftentimes mention the grave in our backyard because it is there. There's a real grave in our backyard. I first noticed the grave before we bought this house, and my oldest daughter and I came over because she'd gotten permission to dig some bulbs out of the yard. So we were over around that side of the house, and she was digging bulbs, and I was just poking around looking, and I saw the headstone. And she said, "Oh yeah, Glenn, the guy who used to own this house, Glenn told me about that. His father is buried there." Well, I'd never heard of such thing. So I was kind of shocked.
And how do you determine that it actually is probably a real grave?
Well, first of all, I had a hard time imagining it. And so looking where it is, which is right outside your bedroom window, I was thinking it's like in a graveyard. If you go, there's a headstone, and then the body is buried, or the casket is buried, kind of, if you imagine that gravestone being over the head of the person, the dead person's body. Headstone. And then it goes back from that. So that's what I figured. And there's trees there. And so, I thought, well, it's probably nobody's buried there. And then, and also because it's just a few feet from the house. So the first thing I did was, because it's a military headstone, I looked it up, and you can find the military records for dispensation. I don't know what you would call it, where they release a headstone to somebody who's a service member has died. And it tells some information. It tells the person's name, their birth date, and it says where the headstone is going to be placed. And so that headstone, their records, military records, says that it was installed in a local cemetery. Well, it's obviously not in a local cemetery. So, other than our house, apparently our grounds are now a cemetery. So we found that old cemetery on a map, and we went out to that cemetery. I think you were there too. I think we all did it.
Can't remember.
It was the time I came down from Wisconsin to bring that kid to his dad.
Oh yeah.
During the pandemic, and it was just a quick turnaround. I came all the way down, dropped him off with his dad, had dinner. We went out to that graveyard. The next morning, I got up and drove back to Wisconsin. So we went out to that cemetery, and we walked around, and we found other members of that guy's family. I'm going to just call him Frank.
His name is Frank?
His name is Frank.
Okay.
So we found other members of Frank's family, and but there was no grave, no headstone for Frank in that area. And then we found a headstone for Frank in that cemetery, but it was tiny. It was like the kind they make for babies. It was not embellished at all. It had his name and the year he was born and the year he died, and it matched up with the years on that headstone that's in our yard, but nothing else. So I thought, this is really weird. So I looked up the death certificate for this guy, and according to the death certificate, he was found by his sister. Okay, first of all, years before he died, he had lived in this house with his wife and his two sons, and probably a mother-in-law or maybe grandmother-in-law, because there were a bunch of people. It was multi-generational living in this house. And what?
That's scary.
That there were that many people living in this house? Yeah, I know, because it's tiny.
And it was even smaller at one point.
Yeah. So he and his wife got divorced, which probably was a big deal at that time, because I can't remember the dates on that headstone out there, but I think he died in the 60s. So it was probably the late 50s that they got divorced. So it was probably a big deal to get divorced. And he went and moved to a town that's probably only 5 miles away from here and lived with his sister, while his ex-wife and her two children, one of whom was Glenn, the man who ended up living in this house till he died, they remained in this house. But he was divorced from his wife. His son, Glenn, felt that he had abandoned them. That's the way he expressed it to Christina. He had abandoned them. So he's living several miles away. He's living with his sister. One day, she discovers his body in the shed. And the death certificate was really odd. I've looked at a lot of death certificates just in doing genealogical research, and it said that he'd been discovered in the shed by his sister, deceased. So it was clear he was dead. Well, he lived with his sister, so how long could he have been there? So it's not like it was rigor mortis or decomp that made his sister know that he was dead. So it had to be something else. So his eyes were blank and staring, or he had a gunshot. And the reason why I bring that up is that would match with why they put that headstone on the edge of the cemetery. Suicide. That's one thing to consider. So on the death certificate, the coroner said an investigation is underway. They could not rule the cause of death. There was no cause of death. The note was an investigation is underway. I have never seen a death certificate not be amended to show the cause of death. To just say there's an investigation and to never have a cause of death. That's kind of suspicious for suicide. Just because it's a small town, Bible Belt, lots of different things go into play on that. Okay, so this is what I think. I think he killed himself, and I think that his family didn't want him in the family plot. And so either he was buried on the edge of the cemetery because he was a suicide, and they just gave him this tiny little stone, and then Glenn and his mom got that fancy military stone and put it in the yard. And that's kind of what I believed for a long time, is that that's just a way of honoring him because they couldn't do it in the graveyard. She was no longer his wife. They put him on the edge of the cemetery, whatever. But I don't believe that anymore. And there are several clues. One clue is there's a big frickin' hump of dirt right next to where that headstone is. And that doesn't make any sense what that hump of dirt is. There's no other corresponding depression of where dirt was taken out. The other thing is that room, the room that I call the big room, that we just use for storage, with all those windows and the planter along the wall, and it's full of dirt. It's not full of potting soil. It's not full of garden soil. It's full of dirt with rocks and everything. It's just dirt. Like they had to put it somewhere, and so they built this thing and put dirt in it. There's not even any evidence that there were ever plants growing in it. But clearly that room was was built as some kind of a place for somebody to get some kind of pleasure or solace out of. They had a pond, they had a wood stove, they had this planter thing full of dirt, and all those big windows. And what is that those big windows look out over?
The grave.
The grave. So I think that dirt, the hump of dirt and the dirt in that raised planter thing, I think that's the dirt that was displaced when they buried the casket.
Makes sense.
So I saw the headstone before I even bought the house. We went and looked it up. We knew that there was a headstone here. But I figured he's not really buried in this yard. He's buried over there on the edge of the graveyard. And then we bought the house, and I don't even remember why, but Christina and I decided we were going to do dowsing. And we'll talk about that another time about dowsing, but it's fascinating, and I've done it a lot, and I did it professionally for a while, and it is fascinating. But in this case, I made my own dowsing sticks because mine are in Wisconsin, and I went out there and I got a reaction. Definitely walking around that area, I got a definite reaction in that area, but it was kind of erratic, and it was erratic in a way that because I was getting a result that I didn't expect. I was getting a location for where there was something in the ground where I wouldn't have expected it. So I went and got Christina, and she did them. And I don't think she's ever done dowsing sticks before. So she put her hands on them, and she walked over there, and it was just so strong. It just went zip to the right and even kind of went down in a place that didn't really seem to make sense, because that's not where you would think that a casket would be in relationship to where this headstone is. Also, let me tell you this. When I first saw that headstone, I could have swore it was in a different place. Christina says, no, it's always been in that location. I could have swore that it was between those two trees. So like 4 feet that direction. and turned the other way.
I don't recall.
Yeah, because you probably didn't see it until after.
Yeah, I didn't, never really.
Getting the house.
I still don't really pay much attention to it.
Yeah. So anyway, so she gets this different reaction. So when Ron got home from work, we told him about this. So he grabs a shovel and he goes out there. And he started kind of scraping around. And not very far under the ground, he hit concrete. And it's not concrete like a sidewalk. It's kind of bumpy. It's kind of like poured hastily.
Mm-hmm.
And when he hit it with the shovel, it sounded hollow. Okay, so because I also am looking for other reasons why this could be, I thought, okay, it's a cistern. But as far as I could tell, when they built this house, there was piped water to this neighborhood. So it's like they never needed a cistern. And there was also piped sewer. Keeping in mind, just right over there was a huge university.
Yeah.
Where the park is.
True.
So there were services here. This was not like a country neighborhood. This was like in the middle of a city where there was money. So it seems hard to imagine that they would have put a septic tank, a foot under the ground, and they didn't need a cistern. So that didn't make sense. But he starts scraping back from where he found this dirt, and he got about 4 feet, and it was clear it goes in a line perpendicular from the big room that way. So it's, the headstone is not on the grave. The headstone is off to the side, or if it is a grave, it's off to the side of where this concrete is. And the concrete's about 3 feet wide and at least 6 feet, maybe 8 feet long, and it's hollow underneath. And when you hit it, you can feel the reverberation. I was standing on one end of it, and it is exactly where that dirt would have been come up from.
Why would it be hollow?
Well, if they made a vault, now...
Wouldn't that be just like so much more work?
Okay, so think about some of the stuff that Glenn did around here.
That's true, yeah.
And also the fact that he worked for the city services, and he also worked for the county services for a while. And so he knew the way things were supposed to be done. And so maybe he thought this is how you do it. This is just how you do it. You make this vault. Or maybe he got a frickin' vault from the cemetery. He stole everything else here, all the wiring and everything. So maybe he stole a vault and he carted it over in the back of his pickup truck and put it in the ground, or I don't know. But it doesn't look like finished concrete work to me. It looks like rough concrete work. And he did enough concrete work around here that he finished the top of it. It maybe isn't the way you should do things, to put concrete where he put them, or to put your expansion joints where he put them. But he did enough concrete work that he obviously knew how to do concrete work. So that either was not done by him, but he lived here his entire life and his grandparents built this house, or it was done hastily. So there's something there. So we can look at the facts. There's a headstone that says somebody is buried there.
Mm-hmm.
A headstone that the military says is supposed to be over 5 miles from here. There's a death certificate that says that basically that this guy died of suspicious circumstances and it was never resolved. So we don't know how he died or why he died or anything else. And where the headstone is, there is a concrete hollow structure, and there is a lot of dirt that has been displaced and that is in a pile and also in a raised bed that you can't account for it because there's no corresponding dip in the yard.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that says that's a grave.
Yeah, it sure does seem like it.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it's like, okay, how much evidence do you need? Seeing a gravestone is pretty good, usually.
Yeah.
That there's a grave there.
Yeah.
But why would it matter? Well, because you're being haunted, or you want to do work there, and you'd have to move the grave.
Right.
And that's expensive, and it gets into a lot of
apparently
stuff.
You have to get what they told me at the city. They told me that you have to get a federal judge to give permission to exhume a grave.
Exhume it, yeah.
And it becomes a big deal, and it's expensive, and it's not an easy thing. And so what's the problem with having a grave in the yard? Is there a problem with having a grave in the yard?
Yeah, and also maybe it's like, okay, it's not the nicest concept, having a grave in your yard.
Does it bother you?
Might freak you out. No, it doesn't. I don't even think about it.
It doesn't bother me at all.
And I never have. Yeah, so you're haunted. It's an aesthetic thing, or it's a cost thing. Yeah. And the thing is, if we're being haunted, it's not by that guy.
Yeah.
He didn't live here, as you said.
Well, he did live here, but he didn't
live here when he died.
He was living somewhere else when he died.
And it doesn't make the quality of the haunting doesn't make sense.
The other thing that is kind of an argument, well, I don't know what it's an argument for, whether it's an argument for or against there being a grave in the yard, but Christina says that Glenn told her that he hated his dad because his dad had abandoned him. So why would he go to the trouble and expense to bury his dad in the yard unless it was for his mother, or he felt like it was his Christian duty to give his father a burial? I don't know. It just seems odd that he would bury his father in the yard if he hated him, although his mother was still alive then. It also seems odd that he would, I don't know, the whole thing just seems weird. But I'm not worried about being haunted. I have never gotten a creepy feeling. That one night I went out there with my phone on video and videoed walking to it and stood there. It felt absolutely nothing. No
vibes.
No vibes, nothing. Don't feel creepy. I don't particularly care for the fact that there's a hump of dirt there. I wouldn't mind having the hump of dirt be gone, but where are you going to put it?
Mm-hmm.
Because the place where it came from is concreted in, and, what do you do with that? I know where you could put it. In your raised bed.
Mm-hmm.
Duh.
We literally are thinking about making raised beds.
Yes.
And we could literally put
and the dirt that's in
bed.
that concrete, the brick thing in the big room.
Mm-hmm.
You can just start digging that dirt out and use it. So I'm not worried about being haunted by him. I think that if anyone is haunting this house, it is Glenn.
Mm-hmm.
It's not his mom. It's not his grandparents. His brother left home and moved somewhere else. So it's, those would be the people. I think the grandma maybe died in here. His mom did not die in here. His mom died in the hospital, I'm pretty sure. He died in the hospital. But maybe his grandma died here.
But he lived here, so where would his spirit come back? To here, where he lived. And so,
yeah,
if we're being haunted, it's by him.
Yeah.
Or Pink. Because remember, we don't just have two graves in the yard.
Oh, that's true. We have another grave.
We don't just have one grave in the yard. We have two graves. One's a cat, but...
Yes. Actually, I am more creeped out by Pink's grave than I am by Frank's grave. And the reason why is because it's fairly fresh. And I keep thinking, it's going to collapse. Or, there's bugs living off her body. And,
animal.
It's more like a ick thing than a, ooh. It's just kind of gross. Because, rotten bodies. The rose bush seems to be doing delightfully.
See? Being haunted by Pink's soul in fine roses.
Pink was a strange cat. She was very neurotic, but she was a good cat.
Yeah.
She had a horrible life, so hopefully she's released from her pain. Frank, on the other hand, who the hell knows? Because I don't know, and you can't find anything else about him. And also, the other weird thing on the death certificate is his sister put down that he was married, and then the coroner put down that he was divorced, and something else said that he'd never been married and had no children.
That's weird.
But I'm sure it's the same person, so I don't know, but I don't know. What do you think? Do you think the grave's there? Do you think that's a grave, or do you think it's just a headstone?
Why not? It's a grave. That makes sense. Seems right.
Yeah.
It doesn't affect anything.
Do you think we should attempt to excavate the grave?
No.
No,
not at all. It's why would we excavate any part of the yard, for one, let alone that area?
Well, okay, so if
if it's an aesthetic thing.
I don't care that the grave is there. If we start digging out the hump of dirt.
Oh, to smooth the dirt out?
Because,
I think
okay,
that's
so
fine
here's the
and
thing
legal
about
and everything.
Here's the thing about Glenn. He did lots of weird, hinky things, and he never did any of them right.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
And so
there might be some issue because it collapses in.
Yeah, and going by where Ron was putting that shovel in, it's not very deep down below that dirt. that it hits concrete. And there is no reason whatsoever for there to be concrete, a 3 foot by 6 to 8 foot long slab of concrete in that area. So, okay, so he might have just dug him right 3 feet under the ground and then just poured concrete over his body to seal it up. I mean, I'm serious here.
Sense, yeah.
Think about the stuff he did, the hole under the house and stuff. So if we start digging out the hump of dirt, it could be interesting.
See, to me, it's like, okay, if we don't have to dig up the dirt, whatever, let it be.
I would really
care.
like the dirt gone. It's a tripping hazard.
I don't know. Haven't really ever know. You talking about the one when you're walking this way?
Yes.
And then you kind of walk up.
Yes.
Not up, but it's like
a hump of dirt.
Slightly raised. I think it'd be fine just to smooth it out.
Okay, you do that.
But
I'll watch with a camera.
But this is the thing. That's super low priority. And it could easily go a long, long time, and I don't care. You know? But, I mean, it's like, that's the degree I care that there's a grave in the yard.
That is dirt that you could use for your raised beds.
There is a perfectly good, huge compost pile that I'll use first. And so I'm not going to immediately start going towards the crypt in the ground to get dirt.
Yeah, it's more like a crypt. I think it's a crypt. And actually, now that I think about it, I think absolutely he did not build a vault.
He just poured concrete.
He just put a coffin there with Frank in it and poured concrete over the top of it. And that's why that concrete looks all lumpy and weird. He just poured concrete over that coffin. And that the hollow is the coffin. It's not a crypt.
I could see it. But, you know.
And again, it's an ick factor. It's an ick factor of rot.
Does it really bother you? Does any of it really bother you?
The only thing that bothers me is if we move that dirt, which I want to.
Does the dirt even bother you?
I really don't like that dirt there. I really don't like there being a big hump of dirt right
because
in the pathway.
It's kind of irritating to walk.
Yeah.
On.
Yeah.
I mean, it's slightly uneven.
It's not slightly uneven. It is a drag to walk over that hump of dirt.
It's like. Not even a foot. It's like
unattractive.
A quarter of a foot.
No, it's not. It's like a foot high. It is like a foot high.
I don't think so.
I
barely even notice it. I barely even think about it, comprehend it. I can't even picture where the grave is. It's so low on my radar.
Okay, so we have determined that Frank is not haunting our house, while Glenn might be. Thanks, listeners, for listening to us discuss the grave in our yard. What do you think? Do you think that we should get rid of the hump of dirt?
Do you think we should move the dirt? Move the dirt.
And possibly uncover the grave? Do you think that Frank is just in a coffin and his son just poured concrete over the top of him? Or do you think that there's nobody buried there at all and that it's just some weird thing that he poured extra concrete in a pile near a gravestone? I don't know. Let me know what you think. Our contact information is in the show notes. You can email us, text us, or even call and leave us a 3-minute voicemail. And as always, if you have a story you want to tell, send it to us. Please share, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and never be so terrified you can't run.